Hi, I'm Dr. Adam Millman. I'd like to share with you a few ideas that I think might be beneficial for everyone that falls under the general statement that I think we might be able to agree with. That is, that it is easier to leave than it is to arrive. These ideas that I'm going to share with you were inspired in large part by the former chief rabbi of England, Jonathan Sacks, of blessed memory, died a few years ago. Also my recent trip to Gettysburg with my family, and the recent July 4th holiday that we celebrated last week. So the idea that it is easier to leave than it is to arrive. And this comes from, if we were to take a brief look at some of the stories that occur in the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers. Now, you don't have to have a strong belief in this, as I said in a previous video on Christianity or Islam or Judaism, to look at the stories and to glean some benefit from the stories. So these two books, both Exodus and the book of Numbers in Hebrew, Shemos and Bamidbar, seem to run on parallel tracks. Both books contain stories of journeys. They also both present the Jewish people as being a quarrelsome, ungrateful nation that complains about food and water and the leadership. In both of the books, there's a great sin that occurs. In the first one, in the book of Exodus, you have the story of the golden calf, and then in the book of Numbers, you have the story of the 10 spies that come back with a bad report about the possibility of conquering the land of Canaan. In both stories, Moses has to intervene as the Almighty threatens to destroy the Jewish people. In both books, Moses is able to successfully intervene and plead on behalf of the children of Israel, and God saves them. And if you were to look at both stories, the book of Numbers and the book of Exodus, you think that the book of Exodus is about leaving. The Exodus means to leave or to depart. The book of Numbers and Hebrew Bamidbar means in the desert. So you would think that by the time you get to the second story, the second half of the journey, that the situation would be much, much easier. As everyone remembers, probably the book of Exodus has to do with the Jewish people suffering in slavery, and then eventually plagues come and strike the Egyptian nation. The army is destroyed, the economy is brought to its knees. Pharaoh eventually lets them go. They come to the sea, they cross the sea. The army is destroyed, and the army of Pharaoh is destroyed in the sea. The people of Israel go to the Mount Sinai. They receive the commandments. Later on, their food is provided for them. It falls from the sky. There's a pillar of fire to guide them at night. There's clouds to protect them from the sun. And they defeat the nation of Amalek. They built the tabernacle, and all the difficult things are past them, and now they're on their way to the promised land. So you'd think by the time you get to the book of Numbers, that situation would be great. But such is not the case. In fact, as Rabbi Sacks said, that the situation in the book of Numbers, the mood in the book of Numbers is palpably much darker. The rebellions seem to be worse. A couple of weeks ago, we read about the rebellion of this man named Korach. Moses' leadership is tested more. The rebellions are worse. His leadership seems to be more hesitant. He succumbs to despair, and the situation seems to be worse. And so why would this be? If all the difficult things occurred in the book of Exodus, why is it by the time we get to the second part of the journey, the book of Numbers, why is the situation why is it worse? Why is it not better? And I think the message that comes forth from here is that it is easier to leave than it is to arrive. It's easier to leave than it is to arrive. It's easier to depose a dictator than it is to build a truly civil society with respect for the law and equal rights. The Bolsheviks came to overthrow the Tsar and did not bring a virtuous utopian society the way they had promised. The fall of the Soviet Union has not led to a civil society in the modern state of Russia. Look at the situation today, but since the fall of communism, it has been very difficult to build a civil society. The Arab Spring is another good example. Dictatorships for years with power concentrated in one place, they're overthrown, but then building a government, building a civil society after that, a pluralistic democracy, is not very simple. And I was recently inspired by my trip to Gettysburg for the 160th anniversary of the battle. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. It was not easy. We had to fight a war against the British, and then another war against the British. And then as Abraham Lincoln said, 7 years later, 1863, we're in the midst of a civil war. We're already at this point, hundreds of thousands of Americans have died. And on July 4th, 1863, my son recently reminded me, that was the Battle of Vicksburg, where Ulysses S. Grant had the Confederates surrender in the city of Vicksburg, a pivotal battle. But this was 7 years later, after the promise of freedom, the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, we're endowed by our Creator. But as you can see, that already a few generations later in the 1860s, this wasn't the case. The situation is very, very dark, where we're fighting to just keep the nation together, and to keep the Union together, and to end slavery. So just because we were able to overthrow King George after a prolonged war does not mean that everything was perfect after the war was fought, and the situation was also fairly bad, that the country fought itself, Americans fighting Americans by 1861 to 1865. So just because we overthrew a dictator did not mean that everything was going to be perfect from the overthrow of that dictator. A utopian society certainly did not arrive. Certainly not for the slaves living in the South, 4 million of them by the time of the Civil War. So leaving is easier, and arriving is much more difficult. And in the story of the Bible, you have the story of Abraham and his father. It says that Terach, the father of Abraham, was told to take his son Abraham and leave the town, which is called Ur Kasdim, and travel to Canaan. But then when they got to a town called Haran, it says that Terach stayed. So Terach was supposed to go. Abraham and Terach were supposed to go from one place to another, but when they got onto the journey, Terach was not able to go the final distance. It was up to Abraham to make the trek from Ur Kasdim to Haran, and then eventually to Canaan. Why was Terach not able to go? We don't really know. But again, it's consistent with this idea that it's easier to leave than it is to arrive. Such is true in relationships as well. It's easy to end a relationship, but it's much more difficult to then build a relationship where there's equal respect in the house, and there's courtesy in the house, and love. It's easy to do that. To end a relationship is easy, but to build something great is much more difficult. So I think what we can glean from this is that as these two stories, as the book of Exodus and Numbers are books of journeys, I think we should see that our own lives are also journeys as well. It was a journey for Abraham, it was a journey for Moses, and it's a journey for us. And when you set out on a journey, what's important is that you have a destination of where you want to go. That way, when you ever fall, if you are ever to lose the map, if you were ever to lose your way, it's easy to get back on track. If you lose the road or you lose the trail, if you know where you're going, you'll be able to find the trail, you'll be able to find the road again. If you don't have a destination, this is not going to happen. So for a destination, we call this goals. Setting goals. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? What do you want to see? What do you want to become? What do you want to share? These are important things that we need to ask ourselves on a daily basis, and I suggest writing them down. Put them in the visor of your car, so when you're at a red light, you can look at them. So you're always reminded. So if you ever fall off track, if you ever lose the trail, lose the road, if you get off track, and this is inevitably going to happen because life throws us all kinds of curveballs. We're always knocked off of what we're trying to accomplish. But when you know where you're going, when you have a destination, it's easy to get back on track again. If you don't know where you're going, then that's not going to happen. So write down the list of goals in the next 5-10 years. Where do you want to go? What do you want to see? What do you want to be? Who would you like to be with? What would you like to share? What would you like to become? And the goals that you want to have, what will you have to become in order to achieve those goals? Set goals for what you will become in the process of achieving those goals. When people ask me, when patients ask me, when they seem to be off track, I ask to see a list of their goals. I said, well, I don't have a list. And I said, as Earl Schultz once asked Jim Rohn, he said, well, is the list in the car? Is it at home? And most of the time people say, I don't have a list. If you don't have a list, if you don't have a list of goals, then getting up each day and staying on track is not really possible because you don't have an end destination. The goals that you have is literally the goals and the dreams that you have are literally the coordinates that you plug into your GPS called life. And by having those things written down and looking them up every day, it's easy to stay on track when things knock you off of track. It's easy to get back on again when you know where you're trying to get to. I tell them to start with a dream, because in dreams, as W.B. Yeats would say, in dreams begin responsibility. The Rabbi Sachs says dreams begin a destination. When you start to dream about what you want from your life, with the current skills that you have, that you are put in this world by whatever cause, the skills that you have at this specific time, in this location, in history, what are your unique skills that you have? How can you utilize them to achieve what you want, to make the difference, so that when you depart this world, that you feel like you've made a difference, that your being here was not a waste. So the skills that you have currently, utilize them, write down the dreams, write down the goals, and think, how can I make a difference? And then this will help you stay on track when things start to seem difficult for you, when times start to get difficult. It amazes me that people will take weeks and months to plan a vacation, but they won't even take a day to plan out their life, to plan the day, to plan the week, to plan the month. Where do they want to be, to write them down and to look at them every day. We should at least take as much time to plan our lives as we do to plan a vacation. When you plan a vacation, you know how long it takes to get to the airport, where the airport is, where you're going to park, where the ticket counter is, how heavy your bags have to be, when you need to arrive, with the things that you can bring on the plane with you and the things that you can't, where you're going to pick up your rental car, where the shuttle is, where the hotel is. All this information is very, very specific. But if we don't even do this for our own lives, then we're going to be confused, and we're going to be off track. It says in an ancient one of the ancient Jewish texts called the Talmud, that it says whenever the words "and it came to pass" are read, that whatever comes after it is something bad. So when the Jewish people, when it says "and it came to pass," whatever follows is something that's going to be bad. And I think the message of that is that when we take things as it comes, when we just sit around and we see what's going to happen, and we're just hanging in there and seeing what's going to turn up and allowing life to happen to us, this is when bad things happen. It's when you're living passively and being acted upon. That's living passively and being acted upon by circumstances. Circumstances are going to affect you, but when you're on track and you have a goal and you have a destination, you have a dream, then when these things happen to you, it's easy. It's much easier to keep going and face the challenges and face the speed bumps. Because you know where you're going. It's easier to leave than it is to arrive. Getting to a destination is much more difficult than it is to leave. And there's a biological basis for this too, isn't there? When there's fear, we're able to run. We sometimes have on strength and capabilities that we were not even aware existed within us. When there's fear and there's threats, especially to our family, the stories of people lifting up a car partially to pull somebody out. We have tremendous speed because we're focused on fleeing from the danger. And that is ingrained in us for generations in the DNA. Animals do the same thing, fleeing from danger. But getting to a place where you've never been, a destination, arriving, is much more difficult. This is a unique human characteristic, to dream a dream and then see the dream come true through action, through discipline, through courage, through tenacity, through resolve, to envision a future and then to create it. It requires skills that we may need to learn. We need assistance from other people, but to dream a dream is and then to fulfill it is to create something that doesn't exist and to make it exist. That's a unique human characteristic. So when it comes to acting, it's much easier to think than it is to do, to plan than to act, to pretend than to achieve, to promise than to produce. It's easier to plan on what you're going to do and say what you're going to do and make lots of promises, but to do it and to follow through on a daily basis until the dream and the goal is fulfilled is much more challenging. In the stories of in the story of the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers, we find the Jewish people with not enough focus on the future and too little faith when things get difficult. They spend a lot of time complaining about food and water and the leadership and the current situation, and envisioning the past as being something that was actually better than it probably was. rather than focusing on the present situation and seeing what can be done to get past it and seeing the future. Instead of focusing on the past and what was or what you think it was and always envisioning it being actually better than it probably was, we should be focusing on the future and the possibilities rather than getting bogged down on this situation that's not going well. Focusing on the future, reviewing your goals, reviewing your dreams, and seeing them to fulfillment is only possible when you stay focused on the possibilities of the future, the promise of the future, rather than the struggles of today and the struggles of the past. It's the future that can be achieved by creating it with the right discipline, the right creativity, and willingness to do what's necessary to get you to where you deserve to be. Thank you very much. Have a great day.